We're inviting all of the 2020 candidates running for president to come and speak at any of these kinds of politics as we can make the schedules work out. So we're really pleased today to have former Congressman John Delaney here, and he's obviously running for president on the Democratic side of 2020. And Skylar Croft, our political editor, and Caitlin Bird, our Palmetto Politics newsletter writer and political reporter, will be doing the hard work, asking all the questions. I'm just here to enjoy and have a beer like the rest of you, but really appreciate you coming out. Just a couple quick ground rules. Obviously, they're going to ask a lot of the questions. We've asked for you all to submit questions ahead of time, so please go shouting out questions or anything like that while we go. But I haven't had a lot of problems with that, so I'm not too worried about it, but just wanted to make sure everybody knew that. Really appreciate y'all coming out today on a very nice Friday afternoon. I think it says a lot about people's interest in knowing how their government is working or not working and how it's going to work in the future. So we're really pleased to have it. I'm going to turn it over to Caitlin and Skylar, and they're going to get this thing started. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us. And realize if you hear any noise, that's the sound of money, so it's not bad. So, all right. Who is John Delaney? Delaney is a former Maryland congressman who served the 6th district, which stretches from the D.C. suburbs around Rockville into Maryland's Western Mountains. Very long district. Before Congress, he was co-founder of Healthcare Financial Partners and Capital Source, a Maryland-based commercial lender. One remarkable achievement is he took a company public on the New York Stock Exchange at age 33. So what have you all done with your lives lately? Yeah.
He's trying to get it in before that thing starts up.
He is also believed the earliest Democrat in the race, joining in July 2017, some 3 years before we even hit the caucus and primary schedule. Business Insider identified his most notable act in Congress was crafting an infrastructure bill, though it floundered in the House. But we'll talk about that in a little bit. He's also credited for seeking bipartisan compromise, which makes him a moderate and centrist. He is the son of an electrician and grew up in a union household. But he's also been identified as one of the wealthiest people in Congress. He has voiced criticism in the past of the Democratic Party as well, and this was one of the quotes we found. We are not coming up with ideas that excite people about our ability to get it done, or being respectful of people about how they think about the world. Or just exciting them how we are planning on leading. So there is some critiques of the party and where it's going. And we'll go from there.
Thank you, Skylar. Thank you guys for coming out today. Thumbs up that you can hear us. You got it? Great. Awesome. I'm Caitlin. And this is John Delaney. We're still learning how to do this, so we appreciate your patience. But let's just dive right in, okay?
Okay.
So you were the first candidate in the race. Eager. That's good.
I thought I would clear the field.
Yeah, well, there you go. Well, we see what we have now. We have 18.
Yes.
18 running. But despite those best efforts, you haven't pulled above 1% since the start of 2017, and you often pull at 0, and that's the same that you pulled in our latest Post and Courier Change Research poll, which just came out in the last 24 hours. So you talked about how it's very early in the race when you've been asked about this polling position in recent months, but the window is starting to close, and the Iowa caucus is 3 months and 9 days away. So what's your game plan to make a splash and turn this around?
Well, first of all, thanks for having me. Skylar, thanks for having me. Caitlin, thanks for having me. I want to thank the Post and Courier for having me, too. It's really nice of you to do this. It is a great afternoon, and it's nice for everyone to come out. So my strategy is really focused on Iowa, and rural Iowa in particular. For my campaign, I have to surprise in Iowa, and I have to do better than expectations. And that's really the focus. And I have, as I said, a real focus on communities that have been left behind, because one of the big challenges in this country is a lot of the economic growth that's has occurred in a handful of places. Literally, last year in the United States of America, 50 counties in this country out of 3,100, so 1.6% of our counties, got 80% of the money for startup businesses. And when you travel around the United States of America, when I travel around South Carolina, I travel around Iowa, we see a lot of small towns that are shrinking and aging, and there's not opportunities for young people. So I have a real focus. I just kicked off something called the Heartland Startup Tour in Iowa, which is all about entrepreneurship, something I spent most of my career doing, starting businesses and creating jobs. And I have, I think, a unique insight and a unique platform around bringing new businesses to lots of communities left behind. So in some ways, I just had an op-ed that came out in the Storm Lake Times today. The Storm Lake Times is the smallest newspaper in the United States of America ever to win a Pulitzer Prize, which it did last year by a journalist there named Art Cullen. And the title of my op-ed is Dear Rural Iowa, I Need Your Help. And the point of it is I'm running on the issues that matter to places in this country that have been left behind economically, and I've got an agenda for them, and I'm banking on them to give me a surprise in Iowa. So that's the strategy in a nutshell.
Well, when we talk about the polling, though, I mean, it's pretty damnable that you haven't gotten above 1%. So when will you know when it's time to step away, if that time comes for you and your candidacy?
So the poll that really matters to me is the Iowa caucus.
Okay.
Because that's not a poll. That's actually human beings showing up and deciding who they want to vote for. And the stakes are real. So that to me, as you said, it's 100 days away.
Yep.
So that to me is the day that's going to matter.
After the Iowa caucus, will you then know whether or not you want to continue?
You know, Lincoln has a really good expression. He had many, 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 many really good expressions. But one of the favorites that I had of his that I really like is you can only paddle to the next bend in the river. So for me, the next bend in the river is the Iowa caucus. And I'm fully committed to the Iowa caucus. And I think we have to surprise in the Iowa caucus. Now, surprising is all about expectations. So that's how I think about it.
Well, then you've got a floor and you've got a ceiling right
Yes.
now. But let's talk about South Carolina, because
Yes.
we love being the first in the South.
Yes,
And-
and I think you guys do a great job.
So you have been running an Iowa-heavy campaign, and to your credit, you were the first candidate in the field to visit all 99 counties in Iowa, which is kind of considered a major political marker for that state and for the presidential race at large. But in South Carolina, it's a little different. So the FEC data shows that you've raised $500, and it came from one donor in Myrtle Beach. So realistically, Iowa aside, if you make it past Iowa, what is your strategy when it comes specifically to South Carolina?
Well, I don't think the fundraising number is relevant because, fortunately, my wife April and I, April's here with me, we've been able to largely fund most of our campaign ourselves. So I've spent more of my time campaigning and focusing on the issues that matter to people. And we've been fortunately been in a position that we haven't had to spend a lot of time, as much time fundraising. So I don't actually think the fundraising number really relates to much. I mean, 40% of the American people can't afford their basic necessities. In many ways, I'm running for them. And I wouldn't expect them to be giving a lot of money to political candidates.
Sir, it is an indicator, though, so that's why we bring it up.
Well, it's an indicator if you're focused on it, right? It's an indicator if you spend all your time fundraising and you don't raise a lot of money, then it is an indicator. But if you largely don't spend much time on it, it's less of an... I mean, indicators are what I would define them as how you choose to spend your time. You see if you're doing well based on how you choose to spend.
So what's the South Carolina strategy?
The South Carolina strategy is, you know, I've been here a half a dozen times, and I think a lot of my platform resonates really well with some of the concerns that exist in South Carolina, economic opportunity being number one. A big part of my campaign is about those kitchen table, pocketbook issues that matter to every American, which is their job, their pay, opportunities for their kids, what's going on in their public schools, and their health care. I believe if you're not talking about one of those issues, you're largely not talking about things that matter to most Americans. Now, there's a lot of issues that matter to the party activists on each side, but in terms of those kitchen table issues, it's kind of those 5 big issues, and that's what my campaign is about. So again, my campaign is I have to do well in Iowa. I think people will pay attention to me in New Hampshire and South Carolina if I do well in Iowa.
You're speaking tomorrow at the Criminal Justice Forum at Benedict, HBCU in Columbia. Can you give us a preview of what you're going to say and what changes do you think need to be done at the federal level addressing crime reform, prison reform, and just dealing with what's going on?
So we did take a good first step with the First Step Act that passed, as you know, in the Congress of the United States, and the President signed into law. But I don't believe it goes far enough. I mean, if you just take a step back, 1 in 3 African-American men in the United States of America have been incarcerated. The United States of America has 25% of the world's prison population, and we only have 5% of the world's citizens. So we clearly incarcerate people at rates that are just shockingly high. And it's ruined people's lives, and it's been racist in terms of how it's unfolded in this country. So I believe a lot more needs to be done. So these are the kind of things I would advocate for as president. The first thing I would do is work to get rid of mandatory minimum sentences, because I think that has largely been the culprit in a lot of these incredibly long sentences that people who have committed relatively minor nonviolent drug offenses have been subject to. I would want to fund public defenders to a much greater degree. I'd like to get rid of the cash bail system. I'd like to get us out of the private prison business, because I think it creates a terrible incentive. And I think we need to do a lot more around recidivism so that people actually have opportunities after if they have committed a crime and they have served their debt to society. I think we really need to be investing in them and putting them in a position so they actually can get a job. So things like banning the box, making sure we have real programs to encourage skills training so they can get engaged in the workforce. So it's all those kind of issues that I think has to be the next step.
This is not an impeachment question, but it's leading up to one. But this is a question from one of our audience today. Do you feel that the Justice Department is an independent federal agency or now serves the president?
Listen, there's a lot of terrific men and women who work for the Justice Department in the United States of America. So I certainly don't want to condemn the Justice Department as a department and all the number of human beings in it. I think the president believes the Justice Department works for him, and I think the president rewards people, including the Attorney General of the United States, based on a loyalty test to him. So that's what I think is going on. I'm certainly not going to indict the Justice Department of the United States of America and the extraordinary men and women who work in it. But I do think at this moment in time, the president basically demands loyalty to him above all. And I think that is having an effect on our government, surely.
Following that up, you were a member of Congress. If you were in the House today, would you vote for the impeachment inquiry?
Yes, I would.
Yes or no? And please state why.
So the answer is yes, I would, because I think based on what the president did in this conversation with Ukraine, which he disclosed, so there's really no question about what occurred. He encouraged a foreign government to interfere in our elections, which is a central challenge we face based on what happened in the last election and based on what we all know is likely to continue to happen. So I think that is a situation that is worthy of this impeachment inquiry. But I do give Speaker Pelosi tremendous credit for resisting earlier calls for impeachment, because many of my former colleagues and many of the people running for president have been calling for the president to be impeached literally since he was elected. And impeachment is a very, very grave response, right? Because it effectively overturns the will of the people that had just happened in the election. And so I think Speaker Pelosi played this really smart, as she normally does. I think she has better insight into whether to impeach this president than all the 2020 candidates combined, by the way. I think she's the one person protecting our democracy at this moment in time. And I think she played it right, resisting early calls for impeachment. But I think the severity of what he did in this particular instance, which I view as deeply unpatriotic, I think merits the impeachment inquiry, and I think we have to get to the bottom of exactly what happened. And the information that's coming out is not good.
Well, based on what you've seen and read and heard so far, does the president need to be legally removed from office?
Well, I would vote for impeachment in the House of Representatives, based on what I know now. You know, it's not completely done yet, but I was in favor of the impeachment inquiry. And then based on the information that's come out in the early stages of this inquiry, I would vote for impeachment.
And let's talk a little bit more about where we are now, because when you first announced your candidacy, you wrote an op-ed and you said that it was because you would bring, quote, an original approach to governing and an economic policy that can put us on a different course. And based on where we are now, do you feel that you're still running for those reasons, that you're the most qualified, or do you find yourself that this really is a race against Donald Trump?
Well, I think you've asked two questions there. So I think by any measure, the single most important thing for this country is to defeat Donald Trump in 2020. You know, we can talk about all the other issues we care about. We can talk about criminal justice reform, we can talk about health care, we can talk about economic policy, we can talk about climate change, we can talk about infrastructure, we can talk about foreign policy. These are all very, very important issues. But in my judgment, by any measure, the single most important thing to do is to defeat him in 2020 because of the risk he poses to our country and to his continued degradation of all the norms that in many ways form the foundation of our country and the international world order. So I think that's the number one goal. And I think Democratic primary voters, and the Democratic Party has to do it, and I think Democratic primary voters in many ways should be voting on that one issue, which is who do they think can defeat Donald Trump. And I think the way to defeat Donald Trump is pretty obvious. You have to win the Senate. I don't think you can actually even argue the other side of that, because if you look at 2016, we lost the Senate. Democrats lost the Senate in 2016. And the data is pretty clear. All the exit polling that was done after the 2016 election indicated that undecided moderates and independents went into the voting booth and overwhelmingly broke towards Donald Trump. They thought, despite the fact that he had said outrageous things, they thought he was an outsider, he's a business person, he'll be moderate. Hillary lost the Senate, Trump won the Senate, he won the White House. 2 years later in 2018, the opposite happened. Right? Democrats slipped 40 seats from Republican to Democratic control. Every one of those candidates, and I campaigned for every single one of them, every one of them ran on solving problems for the American people. They talked about infrastructure. They talked about working with Republicans if it made sense. None of them talked about impeachment. None of them talked about making private insurance illegal. None of them talked about eliminating ICE. They talked about solving problems, working together, supporting the Affordable Care Act, fixing it, and restoring a sense of decency. We won the Senate and we flipped the House, which no one thought we could do because it's gerrymandered. Let's face it, that place is still gerrymandered. So in 2020, it's pretty obvious what's going to happen. The president's going to turn out his base in record numbers, and everything he's doing from a political perspective is focused on turning out his base. So let's assume we have record Republican turnout. We're also going to have record Democratic turnout. I believe no matter who we put up, whether it's me or any of the other people running. And the reason I say that is you just look to 2018. Some districts we had moderates, some we had socialists. Some we had young people, some we had older people, some we had women, men, people of color, white, gay, or straight. In the 435 congressional districts around the United States of America, we had an extraordinarily diverse collection of candidates that beautifully represent who we are as a country. And in every one of those districts, we had record turnout. Why? Because the Democratic Party realized we had to put a check on Trump. So that to me is 2020. Democrats turning out in record numbers, Republicans turning out in record numbers. So who wins the election? The person who can win those voters who basically say the following things. I don't like Trump. He's a liar. But the economy is doing pretty well. We've all heard those things being said by people. We have to win those voters to beat Trump, and we have to put up someone who can win it. And the reason I think I'm the best person is I'm the only person who's running who is a successful business person and a member of Congress. I can go toe-to-toe with him on the economy any day of the week. And I've got real solutions to solve the problems we have based on real legislative solutions. So I can win the Senate. I won the Senate in my congressional district all the time, and I had a tough district. So that's the most important thing. But we also have to remember that Trump is the symptom of a disease. And we have to cure the symptom by beating him, but we also have to address the disease. And the disease is this terrible divisiveness in our country, where increasingly the American people think their enemy is their fellow American because they look different, or they worship a different God, or they're in a different political party. And that has, in my opinion, destroyed our country. And the reason it's destroyed our country is really pretty simple. Not only is it eroding our sense of common purpose, which I think is kind of central to who we are as a nation, but it's also prevented us from doing anything. And if you really want the story of the United States of America in the last 30 years, it's really pretty simple. The world changed really fast. Why? Because of technological innovation and globalization. It's changed everything in our economy. And we didn't do anything to prepare our citizens for it. And a lot of them got left behind, and they're struggling. And that's destabilized our political system, and it is destabilizing the world. So the next president actually has to be someone who wants to restore a sense of common purpose to who we are as a nation, not just so that we feel better about ourselves, but so we can start getting things done and finding common ground that matter to the American people.
And we'll keep talking about elections here. We couldn't have thematically put this together better, so pat on the back for us. But you're one of two candidates who believe the Electoral College should not be eliminated, correct? Andrew.
No, I think it's. If I was starting from scratch, I'd do it differently. But I'm honest with the American people; it'll never change.
Okay. So that's so to that point. Then, can you? I mean, you say it will never change, but after we've seen the Electoral College result clash with those of the popular vote, why do you think that the Electoral College is still sound?
Well, again, I've never said it's sound, and I've never said it's the system that I would create if I was starting from scratch. But again, I believe it's incredibly important to be honest with the American people. And if you're being honest with the American people, you'd say, listen, if we want to change the Electoral College, we have to amend the Constitution. And to amend the Constitution, you have to get small states to vote for that amendment. Small states benefit from the Electoral College. Why would they ever vote to amend it? They won't. And so my point on the Electoral College is talking about it is a waste of everyone's time. And I also, as someone who spends a lot of time, for example, in rural Iowa, I know when you go to rural Iowa and you start talking about overturning the Electoral College, to the kind of rural voters that I want to win back in the Democratic Party, the kind of rural voters who are getting killed by Trump's trade policies. And by the way, if we get our act together on trade as Democrats, we can win them back. And you go to those voters and you start talking about the Electoral College, they say, well, wait a second. So what you're saying is you want California and New York to pick the president. And so I just don't understand why, as a party, we are going to the voters that we need to win, giving them a message that we as a party want to devalue their vote for something that will never happen. That doesn't seem to me to be a smart thing to do. So what I don't defend the Electoral College on the merits, but what I do believe is it's important to be honest if you want to lead. And I don't want to lead a Democratic Party that believes its number one priority is to overturn the Electoral College, and that's actually what we can get done. Because I just don't think we can. So it's really vague. I mean, I'd rather look at the Equal Rights Amendment. There's no argument against the Equal Rights Amendment. I dare anyone in this room to give me an argument as to why the Constitution shouldn't say that women are treated equally to men in every circumstance. But that hasn't passed, let alone the Electoral College overturning. So I just think the Electoral College in many ways is a microcosm of everything that's wrong with politics. We argue about the Electoral College, and half of our country continues to get left behind because we don't have universal pre-K, because we don't have early childhood education, because our drug prices are too high, because interest rates on student loans are too high, because we haven't built infrastructure, because we haven't done anything to address climate. So we're not doing the things that matter to people because we engage in these kind of intellectually interesting arguments that really have no chance of ever happening. So it's not that I'm for the Electoral College, but what I am for is being honest with the American people and being a leader. And I think leaders are honest with people.
Are you saying that some of the Democrats who are running right now are being dishonest with the American people?
Yeah, because I dare them to say how they're going to pass a constitutional amendment to overturn the Electoral College.
Who specifically is being dishonest?
To me, it's such an irrelevant conversation that I don't even pay attention to who's saying it. Because when I hear them saying it, I'm like, okay, you're just wasting everyone's time again.
Well, even as outside of Electoral College,
let's fix gerrymandering.
Yeah.
right? That's an insidious force in our democracy that we can simply change by passing a law in the United States Congress, which I introduced, by the way. You don't need a constitutional amendment. You don't need to get all the small states to sign off on it. You just need a majority of the Congress of the United States to vote for it. And by the way, like 90% of the American people support ending gerrymandering. So there's a place to put every ounce of our energy behind. There's a place where we should empty the tank and fight every day to fix that. And not like say, oh no, we're going to turn the Electoral College. Like the people who are trying to overturn the Electoral College, they can't even tell you how they would start doing that.
Well, let's keep going with policy, but we're going to change the format up a little bit. For folks who've been to the events before, this is one of my favorite parts. We call it the 90-second question. And it's when we ask each candidate who sits down to tell us in 90 seconds to give us your plan for your first 100 days. And yes, you will be timed. We will politely cut you off if you go on for too long. So I'm going to start the timer, so when you're ready, 90 seconds, what would you do in your first 100 days? And go.
So my first 100 days, I would push 5 or 6 big initiatives in infrastructure, in climate, in digital privacy, in national service, in fixing the Affordable Care Act. Every one of them will be based on an existing bipartisan bill in the Congress of the United States. Because on every one of those issues, there is a big bill, I authored a bunch of them, that has bipartisan support that addresses each of those issues. And I want to look out at the American people during my inauguration and say, I want to represent every one of you, whether you voted for me or not. And to prove it in my first 100 days, this is my infrastructure bill. It's based on an existing bipartisan bill. This is my carbon fee and dividend bill, based on an existing bipartisan bill. This is my digital privacy bill, based on an existing bipartisan bill. This is my plan to fix the Affordable Care Act, based on an existing bipartisan bill. And this is my plan to launch national service. And every one of them, every one of these bills, good-minded Democrats and Republicans have found common ground. And me, as your president who wants to unify you, I'm going to put every ounce of my energy around getting these passed. Why? Because we agree with each other on these things, so let's get them done.
And you did it with 15 seconds to spare. Thank you. Turn to the side.
All right, let's talk about health care. You call Medicare for all political suicide for Democrats. But you believe in universal health care. What's the distinction? How do you make health care a citizenship rights, as you're called for? And most importantly, who pays?
So I have a plan called Better Care. And it gives every American basic health care as a right for free, as a right of citizenship. Because I do believe it is a human right.
Not to interrupt, but tell me free to explain what free means.
Free means you don't pay for it.
Free means who pays for it?
I'll get to that. So someone pays for it. Someone pays for everything. But you get it as a benefit. So let me tell you how I do it. First of all, I'd leave Medicare alone. Because Medicare works and people like it. So you leave Medicare alone. The second thing is you give everyone else from when they're born to their 65 a basic federal health care plan that has minimum benefits consistent with the Affordable Care Act. You roll Medicaid into that because Medicaid is a broken system. So now every American has the Better Care plan from when they're born to their 65, and then when they're 65 and above, they have Medicare. But it's not a single payer system, which is what Medicare for All is. Meaning you can opt out and buy private insurance, or you can buy a supplemental plan to upgrade your federal plan. If you opt out, you get a voucher because you're technically entitled to a benefit from the government through your government health care, and you choose not to take it. So you would get a voucher that you could only use to buy health care. So this would create a mixed model system very similar to Germany's, where everyone has basic health care, and then some of them opt out, or some of them buy supplementals to improve it. That system that I just described is fully paid for by 4 discrete pay-fors. First is you need the states to continue to contribute the same amount of money they're doing now through Medicaid. So you got to capture that state contribution. That's the first pay-for. The second pay-for is you wouldn't technically need the Affordable Care Act subsidies anymore. Right? I love the Affordable Care Act, but if you had this plan, you wouldn't need any anymore, so you could use those subsidies. That's the second pay-for. The third pay for is to allow the government to negotiate with pharmaceutical companies through the Medicare program. That's the smallest, but that generates money. The biggest pay for is we eliminate the corporate deductibility of healthcare. Because right now there's a huge loophole. If you work for a company and get healthcare, you don't pay tax on that. If your company were to give you a car allowance or a housing allowance, you'd have to pay tax on that. But when they give you healthcare, you don't pay tax. But the company gets to deduct it. So that's a $4 trillion loophole. We close that loophole. And that fully pays for the system I just described. No middle class tax increases. That's the pay for. Now, some people say, well, will companies still offer health care? I believe they will. Because what will happen is if you show up for work and your company has a really good health care plan, you'd say, I'm going to opt out of my federal plan. You'd get this voucher, which you would then turn into your company, and they would use as an offset for the health care costs they provide you. So that's fully paid for, universal health care, but it's not a single payer system. And the reason I don't like a single payer system is not just that I think it's a terrible idea to go around to half the country and tell them we're going to make your health insurance illegal. I think that's like an unbelievably stupid idea if you want to beat Donald Trump. But there's another problem with single-payer systems, which, by the way, very few countries in the world have. A lot of people who are for Medicare for all like to say everyone in the world has this. That's a lie, right? Lots of countries have universal healthcare systems like I've just described. Very few have single payers. Single payers means the government's the only payer. This is the problem with the single payer system in a nutshell. Right now in the United States of America, Medicaid pays 80% of healthcare costs. Medicare pays 90% of healthcare costs, and commercial insurance pays 120% of healthcare costs. So if you eliminate commercial insurance and have all the funding through the government, unless you massively increase reimbursement rates, which the Medicare for All bill specifically says won't happen, you will by definition underfund the healthcare system, and lots of the healthcare providers you see out there will close.
All right. You're sitting in the most anti-union state in the country. You grew up in a union household. How important was that for your family, and what would you do as president to encourage unionship in the South?
So, other than our family, this was probably the most important thing. So my dad was a lifelong member of the International Brotherhood of Electoral Workers.
They sponsored my baseball team when I was growing up.
They were a great union. And they took really good care of us. So they paid my dad enough so that he had one job. Unlike a lot of Americans now who need two or three. Which meant he could spend time with us. When he didn't work, which he didn't work all the time, we had health care. When he retired, he had a pension. When I went to college, that union gave me a scholarship to pay for half of my tuition. My parents didn't go to college. I would have never been able to afford college but for that scholarship. And what that really means is I wouldn't have had any of the opportunities I've had but for the fact that these electricians threw money into a hat every week to create a scholarship. So I would define that union as providing our family with not just a living wage, but providing our family with dignity and providing our family with opportunity. And my dad never got hurt. So they obviously created a safe working environment. So I think unions provide opportunity, I think they provide safety, I think they provide dignity, and I think they support living wages. So I'm very pro-union. Now we've seen an assault on unions in this country, particularly private sector unions, across the last several years, with these right-to-work laws. And there's efforts to try to make that a federal policy. So the first thing I would do as president is fight against this notion of federal right-to-work laws. Secondly, I would support a whole variety of initiatives that allow and make it easier for people to organize. And I think if you make it easier for people to organize, a lot of them are going to organize. So that's what I would do as president.
Continuing that, you represented one of the most gridlocked cities on the East Coast. DC suburbs responsible for a lot of that. How do you solve America's infrastructure problem, and what's the secret aside from throwing more money in it?
Well, we do need more money. I mean, if you just look at the data, we used to spend 5% of our GDP on infrastructure. 5%. Now we spend 2.6%. And our main economic competitor, China, spends 8.5%. So that doesn't feel like a very good story as it relates to the dollars. But it's more than dollars. You know, you have to make sure you're funding the right projects. So I'm a big believer that infrastructure decisions need to be made locally. In other words, the infrastructure decisions that this city's going to make are probably very different than the infrastructure decisions, you know, Des Moines, Iowa's going to make. So I'm a big believer in the federal government shouldn't be picking the projects. The federal government should be providing resources to the states. I also believe the states and local government should put some money in it, because skin in the game makes the project selection criteria much more successful. But I also think we have what I call is a pipeline issue. Meaning, if you want to build a lot of infrastructure projects, you need to create a pipeline for these projects to get envisioned, dreamed of, designed, and permitted. And a lot of that stuff takes way too long in this country. So I think as part of the national infrastructure program, what I've proposed is things called regional accelerators, where you actually allow regions, which could be its own state if it's big enough, right? Or it could be a couple of states, where they can designate projects to have accelerated approval processes. And I'm totally supportive of those things. So I think it's a pipeline issue, and I don't mean pipeline in terms of physical pipeline, I mean building up the pipeline of projects so they're ready to go. I think you have to have a long-term view on infrastructure. I think one of the worst things we ever came up with was this concept of shovel-ready infrastructure. Because, for example, if you were to decide to massively expand the port here, that may take a while to get done. It probably wouldn't be shovel-ready for a long time. But the minute you make that commitment, economic activity would start changing. People would start making business and investment decisions based on that commitment to do this really good long-term project. So I proposed the largest, most bipartisan infrastructure bill in the Congress. It was $1 trillion of infrastructure, fully paid for by reforming our international tax system. When the Republicans passed their tax cut bill, they took my bill and took half of it. They took the reform to the international tax system, they put that in the bill. Instead of using the money that generated to pay for infrastructure, they used it to pay for corporate tax cuts. The corporate tax rate was 35%. That was too high. It was the highest of any nation in the world. It needed to go down. I thought it should have went to 27. President Obama thought it should have went to 27. The business community wanted it at 25. They lowered it to 21. No one even asked for 21. It's like putting your house for sale and someone coming over and offering you more than it's worth. So I would raise the corporate tax rate, not back up to 35 because that was too high. I'd get it to 26, 27. That would pay for over $1 trillion infrastructure program. And I just think as a country, we'd be better off spending $1 trillion to $2 trillion on infrastructure and having a 26% corporate tax rate than not spending the money on infrastructure and having a 21%. As a business person, I think that would lead to more economic growth.
So you qualified for the first two Democratic debates, which is really important to your strategy to introduce yourself to voters across the country and outside of Iowa. But since that time, you have not qualified for the last two debates. So since you missed them, we're going to ask you two debate questions, one from each. One is from the September debate, and one is from the recent one that we just had last week in October. The rules are the same.
I should have watched them.
Oh, really? You didn't watch it? I'm sorry, I had to ask. Okay, so the rules are the same. You get 60 seconds to respond. I'll time it. This first question, it's a little bit of an abbreviated version because sometimes they single out specific candidates when they ask these questions. But question one is, we know that the racial divide started long before President Trump and President Obama, but many Democrats have said President Trump has made that divide worse. Why are you the most qualified candidate to address this divide? And I'll start the timer now.
Well, you know, look at the racial divide started with the original sin of slavery, you know, where for 250 to 300 years we enslaved human beings. Then we had another century of Jim Crow, right? So we had 3 to 4 centuries of either slavery or outright open, brazen racism in this country. And so the long shadow of that is still cast on this country. And I think we need a president who wakes up every day and not only tries to unify this country, but also makes their voice and even their presence in every conversation that involves healing or hate. And so I'm just committed to that. I'm also committed to fixing the structural racism that continues to permeate our country in our education system, in our healthcare system, and our housing system, right? And because how we fund public education in this country, tied to property tax, is deeply racially unfair. How affordable housing decisions are made and how healthcare decisions in terms of investments are made. So I would address the structural racism, and I would be a strong standard bearer against brazen open racism.
Thank you. Skylar, you want to ask the second one?
Yes. Wait, back up here a second. This is again was a debate question. The vast majority of homicides committed with a gun in this country are from handguns, not assault-style weapons. What's your plan to prevent those deaths?
Well, again, my plan on making this country safer from a gun perspective has really got 3 components to it. The first is something that most Americans agree with, which is to pass universal background checks. The second thing is to put limitations on high-powered assault weapons, which I know isn't your question, but that's part of what I think we need to do. That was a bipartisan deal back in the 90s, and we can do that again. And the third thing is to create national, federal red flag laws, which my state of Maryland has, and they work. So those are the 3 things I want to do that are directly related to gun safety. And then I think we also need to address mental health in this country, because we have a huge mental health crisis. And it is part and parcel of this these gun tragedies we have. But it's not the only thing, because other countries have mental health issues, other countries have video game issues, but no other country has the sheer number of gun violence that we do. And so universal background checks, limitations on assault weapons, and national red flag laws.
All right. Well, I think we're bumping against the clock now, so we're going to do 2 things here. We're going to thank the folks from Palmetto for hosting us.
Yes, thank you.
Yes, thank you.
We're going to thank the congressman again. We're going to remind everybody that we're trying to get some more of these scheduled, so please pay attention to the Post and Courier, the Post and Courier news letter site.
Palmetto Politics newsletter.
Palmetto Politics, everywhere we go. And so what we're going to do here is we're going to finish up with our lightning round of questions, and then we're going to give you a couple minutes of closing time. So with that, we're going to start. Are you ready? You're from Maryland. Settle this for us. Crabs or oysters?
Crabs.
Why?
I just like them better than oysters.
Orioles or Nationals?
My oldest daughter just got married, and on the save the date invitation, we had this wonderful little crab on the top, to talk about.
Yeah, delicious.
Yeah.
Orioles or Nationals?
I'm going to the game actually tomorrow night. I'm a huge Nats fan. I love the Orioles, but I'm really a Nats fan at my core.
One moment that people remember during the debates that you qualified for was the range of facial expressions that you displayed when Elizabeth Warren told you she didn't understand why anybody, quote, goes to all the trouble of running for president of the United States just to talk about what we can't really do and shouldn't fight for. Just what was going through your mind when that was happening? You're on a national debate stage and here it comes.
Well, I was like, why does anyone go through the trouble to run for president on stuff that's never going to happen?
There you go. Good. Well, we're going to go back to food because that's fun. So tell us, what is the best food that you've had in South Carolina? Please be specific. And you can't say crab cakes now. I'm going to take that one off the table.
Well, it's definitely seafood. I just think anything with shrimp down here is great.
Have you had
To me it's really simple. If it has shrimp in it, I like shrimp. The shrimp are good down here. They know how to cook them down here. So if it's shrimp, I'm good.
All right. Which 2 books, one fiction and one nonfiction, have most influenced your life? You can't say your religious books, but what 2 books, one fiction, one nonfiction, have most influenced your life?
So I can't say the Bible.
No religious books.
So, I'll tell you a book that I read when I was young that really kind of got me into reading was The Catcher in the Rye.
Okay.
So I'm just trying to think nonfiction. I started trying to read presidential biographies. I tell you, the biography I really loved was Grant's.
I've heard that's good.
All right, this is the last question. Yesterday, Tim Ryan dropped out of the race, winnowing the field to a still large 18. If you do not secure the nomination, what is your plan to stay involved and a part of this conversation?
Well, you know what? So my wife April and I, April's here with me, and we kind of made a decision about 10 years ago to dedicate the rest of our lives to public service. We had always thought of our lives as a third learning, a third earning, and a third serving. And that led to our decision to run for Congress. So again, I'm going to go back to my Lincoln expression, which you can only paddle the next bend in the river. So I would say I don't have any specific plans other than to paddle as hard as I can to win the Democratic nomination for president. But we want to be involved and engaged. April's been involved in public service for a long time with her work at a nonprofit, Common Sense Media. And, I think that's really important to us. And we've been blessed enough to be able to do it. So,
With that, we'll give you the last 2 minutes.
so I'm going to tie into your question because people ask me this question all the time, and I do think it's an amazing privilege to be able to live a meaningful life. And I do think of it as a privilege because, there's certain things in life we do out of a sense of duty. There's certain things in life we do out of a sense of obligation. And there is certain things in life we do out of a sense of privilege. And I think public service is a sense of privilege. And I think people who serve should do it for the right reason. And so I'll probably conclude by saying I'm doing this for the right reason. I want to really make a difference in the lives of my fellow citizens. I believe I have a unique set of skills and a unique expertise that this country needs at this moment in time. But I also think I have the right perspective. I wrote a book because if you run for president, you have to write a book. I didn't know that until I announced. But the title of the book was called The Right Answer. And it came from a speech that John Kennedy gave in 1958, where he said we should not seek the Republican answer, we should not seek the Democratic answer, we should seek the right answer. And that's why I'm running for president. I think this is a magnificent country. I think we have every advantage any nation could possibly want to have in 2019, except for one thing. Our government isn't doing the right thing for our citizens to prepare them for the future. And it's pretty obvious to me what we need to do. And I think there's an opportunity to build a broad consensus around a lot of them. You have to have the mindset, the determination, and the commitment to want to find that common ground that's necessary to do it, which I don't think is a dirty word, by the way. I don't think bipartisan or compromise or finding common ground are dirty words. I think they're the path to progress. I think they're the path to improving people's lives, and that's why I'm running for president.
Very good. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you guys for coming.